The astrology of the modern era uses the circular horoscope. Today, the round chart is almost universally accepted. A.T. Mann named his widely read study of modern astrology the round art. He regards the circular horoscope as integral and paradigmatic to the whole art itself. Horoscopy, as it is practiced, certainly in the West today, is entirely based on this method. In fact, though, up until the 19th century and going back thousands of years and extending beyond just Western astrology to Indian and Chinese astrology as well, astrological charts were always cast as squares, not circles. In historical terms, astrology is the square art, not the round art. Traditionally, the data of an astrological calculation made at a nativity or for whatever other purpose was illustrated upon the structure of a square design, and anyone familiar with astrology would be able to read such a chart with ease. The modern chart displays exactly the same information, but modern tastes prefer to display it upon a circular structure rather than a square one. Modern people cannot make much sense of the square design since they are comfortable with the circular one. This is not insignificant in itself and bears some reflection. The modern embrace of the round chart and rejection of the square symbolizes a shift from a realist to a nominalist cosmology. The round chart depicts the open universe of astronomical space, whereas the square chart depicts a concrete cosmology in which the sublunary world is itself a symbol. This is really our interest here. Astrology as a symbolic language and as a traditional cosmology, rather than mere horoscopy. Astrology is, properly speaking, a set of symbols to be contemplated. So how does one read or make sense of a traditional square chart? We will use a chart ascribed to Plato as our example, and we'll go through it step by step. The ultimate origins of this horoscope of Plato are unknown. It is reported in the Mathesis of Firmicus Maternus. We can best describe it as traditional too, bearing in mind that we have not the slightest clue of the actual date of Plato's birth, let alone the time of day. Most of what we know of the life of Plato comes from biographers writing several hundred years after his death. As horoscopes go, this one is particularly fanciful. All the same, it comes down to us among material that is of uncommon interest and esoteric value. Firmicus Maternus is an important source on other counts and gives us other symbolic devices set as horoscopes or genitures. This horoscope of Plato is not without some significance. It was preserved for a reason. It is assuredly not historical, but then I'm sure it was not intended to be. A symbolic nativity is much more interesting than an actual one. For reference, Plato's actual birth, based on ancient reports, all of them late and unreliable, is estimated to be any time between 429 BC and 423 BC. It's a chart that requires considerable rectification. First, a general remark. The geocentric world is traditionally conceived as rectilinear. This is why we demarcate four directions: north, south, east and west. This fourness is the explicit visual basis of the square chart, but is largely lost in the round chart, which posits a world without corners. It is a truism of traditional symbolism that circularity is a characteristic of the heavens. The planets and the stars, the whole sky, moves in circles. The sun and moon are circles. But terrestrial sublunary symbolism is square. Our buildings, our temples, are essentially boxes. There are circular buildings, certainly, usually architectural references to the sky, but there is something inherently earthy about the right angle. We use a square horoscope because it depicts a traditional cosmology. It shows the transposition of objects in the circular heavens onto the rectilinear frame of the sublunary realm. Sacred architecture often shows exactly this. A dome upon a square base is a depiction of the traditional geocentric astrological cosmos. The square horoscope is a two-dimensional view of this symbolic structure. You can think of the square chart as like the floor plan of a temple. The square arrangement invites us to think architecturally. It casts the world as temple. All such symbolism is lost in the round chart. Nevertheless, just like the round chart, the square chart is of value only because it allows us to see what the heavens were like at a particular time and place. The square chart may be a symbolic device, but it is also accurate enough to be of practical use. It shows the positions of heavenly bodies as seen from within set terrestrial coordinates at a particular time and place. To read a square chart, one just needs to know the coordinates that provide the frame in which to place the planets and other heavenly bodies. The eastern and western horizons are located on the square chart in this way. The ascendant is in the east, the descendant in the west, although in the southern hemisphere this will be reversed. The mid-heaven and the imum coli, the higher and lower heavens, corresponding to north and south, up and down a vertical axis, are marked in this way. In the southern hemisphere, north and south are reversed. These 4 points are the essential coordinates of a square chart, which depicts them set at right angles to each other. These denote risings, settings, and culminations. The great advantage to the square presentation is that one can see at a glance planets that are rising, setting, or culminating. Planets in the first house are rising, those in the seventh house are setting, those in the 10th are culminating in the heavens, and those in the 4th are culminating in the underworld. In all traditional astrology, planets in these houses, the angular houses, such planets are said to be on the angles, are magnified in power. Of course, there are 7 and only 7 planets in traditional astrology. In Plato's case, we see that Venus, Mercury and Mars are rising in the first house, that is to say, they are ascending. Venus as the morning star. Jupiter is setting in the 7th house. The potency of these planets is therefore amplified. This follows from an astrology based in direct observation. Objects in the sky on the horizon, east and west, tend to be enlarged by certain optical effects. The rising moon is bigger than a moon fully risen. And objects at culmination seem brighter because we see them without the dust and humidity in the atmosphere nearer to the horizons. In traditional astrology, risings, settings and culminations are the crucial factors. The square chart emphasizes them accordingly. The closer planets are to these points, the stronger they are, and conversely, the further planets are from these points, the weaker they are. This is the basis of the house system, which is what is being depicted in the divisions of the square. There are 12 so-called houses, sometimes called domains, domiciles, or temples. With the square chart, we can see these strengths and weaknesses at a glance. We can instantly see what planets are on the angles, and we can very easily assess the potency of a planet by seeing its house position. The houses are the important divisions in this system. In modern times, there is much confusion about houses. In the traditional system, the houses are a way of showing how close a planet is to rising, setting, or culmination. Let's repeat that. In the traditional system, the houses are a way of showing how close a planet is to rising, setting, or culminating. The houses are designated to be angular, succedent, or cadent. The square arrangement gives proper emphasis to this. The angles are, as it were, points of crisis. The impetus released at that point first stabilizes in the succedent phase and then is dispersed in the cadent. The 10th house represents the crisis of culmination, for example. The 11th presents its stabilization. By the 12th it fades. The 12th represents its dispersal. Where the houses are ascribed zodiacal signs, say in Plato's chart the 6th house is assigned to Cancer, this designates the zodiacal sign on the cusp of that house. The house is therefore coloured by this zodiacal influence. The zodiacal signs, in fact, are somewhat less important than they tend to be in modern astrology. Their influence is mediated through the houses. It is the houses that are important. Note especially that not much emphasis is placed on the planets in zodiacal signs. What is important is the zodiacal influence mediated through the house, that is, via the terrestrial symbolic space. In Plato's chart, for example, it does not matter very much what zodiacal sign Jupiter may be in. What matters is that the descendant, the 6th, 7th house cusp, is in Leo. Jupiter is to be seen through that filter. We say Jupiter in the 7th with Leo on the cusp. It is quite possible that Jupiter may not be in Leo. No matter. What matters is that Jupiter is in a house with Leo on the cusp. In modern times too, there is much confusion about so-called aspects. Modern astrology, that follows from the worldview of the nominalistic round chart, uses what are properly called bodily aspects. Traditional astrology does not, or rarely so. Instead, in the traditional method as it is built into the square chart, aspects are a series of faces or relations between houses. The square chart enables seeing such relationships at a glance. At most, one merely needs to count how many houses the planets are from each other. Aspects, of course, are views, like the several views that one might have of another person, such as, for instance, the aspects used in portrait painting. This is Van Dyck's triple portrait of Charles I. The subject is seen from three aspects, three faces. In astrology, these are measured in increments of 30 degrees, 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180. When two planets are in opposing houses, they are at 180 degrees, which is to say they are looking at each other face to face. At 90 degrees, they are in profile, and so on. One of the best ways to appreciate the traditional aspects is to make a study of portrait painting, an especially rich area of European art. The question is not the exact bodily angular relation of planets in the circular heavens, but rather their relative positions vis-a-vis the cardinal points of rising, setting, and culminating. This is what the traditional aspects are about. As for reading Plato's chart, as already mentioned, Venus, Mercury, and Mars are together in the first house. They are rising, ascending. This makes them very powerful. Indeed, Venus is on the ascendant, rising ahead of the Sun in the second house. Venus is the morning star and is the most powerful object in the chart. For whatever reason, this nativity of Plato wants to have him born under the morning star. This seems to be its principal concern. In the traditional method, the 7 planets are considered in certain important pairings: Luna, Saturnus, Luna, Sol, Sol, Saturnus, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Mars. In Plato's case, we see that Mercury and Jupiter and Venus and Mars are all found on the angles, making these pairings stronger, whereas the pairings of Luna and Sol and Saturnus are more subdued because they are not on the angles. Luna and Sol, though, are at 90 degrees, 3 times 30 degrees, regarded as a constructive aspect. More importantly, the planets in the first house form triangular relations, 4 times 30 degrees, with Luna and with Saturnus. This at least is the beginning of interpretation. The square chart allows us to see what is important immediately. The relative powers of the planets is determined in the first instance by the risings, settings, and culminations. The traditional chart is designed with this in view. Let us conclude by adding that the modern horoscope is a mess, an abomination of clutter and pseudo-scientific precision. There is a profusion of factors, great and small, without any real sense of what is important and what is not. The greatest virtue of the square chart is its fourfold simplicity.